to another episode of Colubrid and Colubroid Radio. In fact, we are on episode 33. Our guest tonight is Chelsea Isdaner of Smoldering Serpents, and we're going to be talking about naturalistic keeping with colubrids and colubroids. Anybody that is anyone that's been on social media has almost certainly invariably bumbled into Smoldering Serpents photographs of their incredibly awesome setups. And I know I can speak for Clint and I. We have both been wowed many times. And so we want to know how they do that. But before we get into that conversation, it is, status quo for us to just kind of give an update. It's been a little while since we recorded. I think it's been maybe 2 or 3 weeks, something like that.
Sounds right.
I am now in the summer. Thank you, sweet baby Jesus. The semester is dead. I have never bugged out of West Liberty so fast in my life. I had to go to graduation on Saturday after classes were done, and then at 7 a.m. I was in the Pittsburgh airport heading to an airplane to fly to Minnesota to start one of my grad students' projects with hognose snakes. If you've listened to the show, you probably know, because that's when we had started, that I did a 10-day trip to Kansas in hopes of finding Nassicus and found over a couple hundred snakes, and not a single one of the little boogers was a live Western hog. And Minnesota it destroyed the strike, and we ended up getting a handful of them, not tons of them. But we did find the animals, and I can tell you that seeing wild Nassicus and then seeing what the Nassicus looked like in human care and then seeing wild Nassicus again, I don't think there's any better way for me to start this book, because I'm going to just go on record saying right now in front of everyone, wild Nassicus are fat. They're not like a little fat. They're like Captain Tubbs waddling around in their, Vivs. And my grad student's thesis is investigating that. The other thing I feel need to say is we didn't just go up to Minnesota and, herp around. Nassicus are a protected species there, and I was working with 2 wonderful, incredibly knowledgeable biologists. One guy named Chris Smith and another woman named Erica Hoagland, and they put us on the animals. I got a bunch of cool data, so I brought my solarimeter, so I got UV readings from where the snakes were resting, which was cool. I got a ton of temperature data, so when we saw the snakes out, I temped them before we touched them. I temped the ground around them. And it was just a wonderful way to start the summer, because I got to be scientist nerd Zach, and we'll flat out tell you that my perspective has changed. So that's the biggie. And then other than that, I have plenty of animals dropping eggs. The king snakes, it's really funny. I didn't think I did well with the king snakes, and now I think there's 8 clutches in the incubator, and there's 4 more. So I bred 12 pairs, and I think I'm getting 12 clutches. So there's that. And then I talked about the hognose snakes for West Liberty, and we definitely have plenty of hognose snakes on the way. So yeah. And then I guess the only other thing I have, which was, we all have those like heartaches where you're like, oh, I guess you were gravid, huh? And my heartache was, I have a lavender false water cobra, and then I have 2 hets. I have a European het, and I have a het from Sawfish Reptiles. And I'm pretty sure it was, I paired my lav with both of the het females. They're a tiny bit on the small side, and I just kept looking at the girls thinking it didn't work. The male was too small. Oh well. And when I was checking all the cages the night I got back from Minnesota, I looked in the hide box from like across the room and thought, oh, damn it, you didn't eat that rat I gave you. And then I got close and was like, wow, that rat's really shaped like an egg, and it's on top of another dead rat, which is on top of another dead rat. I was like, oh, son of a bitch. And there were 6 gigantic eggs. Like, these were, like, falsies have big eggs. These were 2 times the normal size of a false water cobra egg. And I think they're still viable. I think that she dropped them like 2 or 3 days before I got in, but they were in her hide box, so she just went all over them. So they're in the incubator anyway, and we'll see what happens with them. But of all the freaking pairs, man, that's a clutch that could potentially feed my collection for the next year. So,
right.
Anyway, but yeah, that's my updates. How about you, Clint?
Okay, buddy, sit back, because normally I feel like I'm just thinking, oh yeah, I've just been busy, this and that, whenever I'm giving updates, but there is so much that's gone on in the past few weeks that I want to share and want to talk about. So, first, colubrids are starting to lay. Finally, I'm running a little later than what I normally do, but we've got a few species of milk snakes now in the incubator. Cool. Black rat morphs in the incubator. Cow kings, I think maybe Mexican black kings already, or if not, she's about to, but just gravid females all over the place. So, I've had several ball python clutches already, but it's now that I'm getting the colubrids, I'm feeling more like myself.
I got you.
Like, okay, yeah, I'm still me. Right? So, some bamboo rats, things like that starting to lay. So that's really Chinese king rats.
Nice.
Got eggs on the ground. And I mean, those have been hit and miss for me over the years. So I think we're going to have a good year with them. And I think really with them, the difference I found is getting them out of a rack, getting them in a cage again, and boom, we start producing over. So super excited with where we're going there. So that's one. Two, this was big. And I alluded to this on a previous episode when I talked about a manufacturer of caging and racks was going to let us carry them. So now that it's official, it's here, I can kind of talk a little bit more about that, because it was super exciting. We now carry Bavarian Electronics racks and caging in the store.
Very nice.
And the cool thing about it was it's not only does Rich let us carry them, Rich from Reptile Basics delivered them himself to the facility, toured everything. We had a great time, gave me some tips on different pieces and some other areas that we're going to work together that he's helping me out on. So, I kind of fanboyed out for a minute.
I got you.
I've been buying from Rich, and I've talked to him many times at shows, but I've been getting things from Reptile Basics for years and years, long before Metazotics was created. So to have him here walking around, looking over everything and finding out, I mean, how many things he keeps himself. And I thought he was just kind of out of it, but no, I mean, that was a great time.
Oh, that's fantastic.
So super excited on those. Let's see, next up, and here's something I hadn't even told you that I was going to do yet, Zach, so forgive me.
That's okay. You're forgiven.
So one of the things that's so neat when it happens, there are moments where we have individuals who literally drive hours to come visit the shop, right? And that's just such a good feeling. And weekend before last, we had a family that drove 3 hours one way just to come to the shop. And it's the second time they've done it. And I know that they're listeners. I know that they're going to hear this. So I hope I'm talking about you whenever you hear this, because I can tell you, as much as they may have enjoyed it, it certainly means so much more to me. And it got me thinking that we have individuals that listen to the podcast all over the country, and maybe abroad at this point. So I want to do something for the listeners. So write this down, all the listeners out there. By the time this episode is aired, I will have a discount loaded into the website.
Nice.
And the discount is CC Radio. Again, that is CC Radio. And if you put that in, you'll be eligible for 5% off of anything at any point on the website.
Oh, that's awesome,
and
Clint.
So that way it's just for the listener. And it's because when he came in and he's talking about the podcast, I'm like, you know what? I need to do something, for the CCR listeners. So CC Radio, and that'll give you 5% off of anything. Okay. So still going.
You're still going, man.
now I'm telling you, that's what I said. So now here's the two big things that I've learned. Well, one thing I learned and one thing that's about to happen. Something cool that it's not going to be an immediate thing, but you talking about having hognose and all falsies. So I sent you a message, Zach, here recently. In Indiana, we have often had sorry, my phone started going off, threw me off. In Indiana, the law has stated that we couldn't have any rear fang venomous. And That was just kind of black and white, no rear fang venomous. So, but anytime I would go to shows, I would see hognose all over the place,
Yeah.
even in Indiana. So DNRs obviously was kind of looking the other way, but I didn't want to kind of go into a gray area. So I emailed DNR, got in touch with them, and finally I've heard back, and they provided me a list of anything that is not deemed venomous, true venomous by the Indiana DNR, we can have without permits. So we had on the list, hognose, obviously,
Yes.
several Boega. And so I'm like pumped about that now.
Yeah.
And then right there, false water cobras.
Boom.
And I'm like, send it to Zach.
Yeah.
Zach, guess what I can play with now, man? So I can't wait to get my hands on some of this stuff. And I fire back on, hey, here's some others that I'm interested in, and hoping that we can do. So I know it's silly, but I'm super stoked because that's it. I just needed it in writing that, yes, we can have it right here in the shop and, we can work with it. So very, very, very excited on that. Now, the last piece, and here's the big one. Been working on this for about a month, and this Friday I'm heading 9 hours away one way to pick up about 180 to 200 animal collection, largest acquisition we've ever made, and we're taking a 22-foot enclosed trailer to bring all of the rack systems.
Holy mother.
I mean, it's in it. When I say an entire collection, it's an entire collection buyout. I went a few weeks ago to look at it in person, make sure that, we both kind of agreed on what we wanted to do. But I'm not looking forward to the trip. I'm not, I'm not looking forward to the loading, the unloading, the organizing, all that. And, we had to completely redo our quarantine room to make way, because all this goes straight into quarantine. You know how that is.
Yep.
But luckily, it all comes with its own caging.
Yeah, there you go.
Right. I just had to make space, but it's exciting because it's, normally when you see big collections parted with, it's ball pythons, right? And while there's a few of those sprinkled in, this is mainly gray banded kings.
Oh, cool.
Subocs, some rosy boas, some different getulas. It's just a lot of colubrids in this, and I'm pretty stoked, pretty excited to get it in and kind of get it sorted. But like I said, I'm not looking forward to the work. I'm not looking forward to the increased feed bill. But I think it's neat. And so
that's
like
badass.
I said, man, past few weeks, it's been a hectic few weeks and a lot of things moving. So I finally had a major update list.
You did. Much bigger than mine.
Finally, right?
Awesome. So, well, I have two questions real quick. Well,
sure.
One question and then one statement's better. Have you kept Alterna before?
Yes, and I used to kill them regularly.
That's what I was going to ask. I have my first pair. We took a bunch of corn snakes and gave them to a breeder. Well, actually, it was the other like 30 from the 50 I sent you. And this breeder's kind of funny. The herpetoculture community is a very interesting one in that you never give anything away for free. There's always a gift in return. And I've tried explaining to people, like, we don't need anything, and then, like, boom, you get offered something, and then it's usually something where you're like, well, I mean, I guess I can take that.
Yeah, I kind of yeah.
And one of our people that we were giving the corn, and they were just throwing things out, and then they were like, well, what about a pair of Blairface Alterna? And I was like, okay. So I have those. They came to my house. They're in quarantine now, and I just have always kind of viewed that snake as the snake that I will kill, like, But I also have them as like well-established adults, and so far they're pounding everything that I get. Like, that's just like keeping any other king snake right now. But yeah.
I think for me, because looking back, the last time I had any gray bands, we're talking, gosh, it's 20 years at this point. And, back then there really wasn't a lot of information. You couldn't just hop and get everything. And I think my mistake back then was pretty much keeping them like a corn snake, keeping them like anything else. And I'm sure my humidity was probably too high, just like suboc. And that's my plan and intention, is to keep them like subocs and go from there. And another hesitation I'd had before was, if I'm going to keep any gray bands and breed them, then you got the headache of getting the babies to feed. But I keep feeder lizards on hand now.
Oh,
here at the shop. So I'm like, bring it on. I got everything I need. So yeah, I mean, they're such a beautiful.
They are.
They really are. And I'm willing to, let's give it another go.
Right.
Let's try it. So I've done okay with subocs. I think that at this point, this go around, hopefully I've got a little bit more intelligence on me when it comes to what I'm dealing with.
Well, and then the statement is, I will be honored to give you your first false water cobras, man.
I'm so excited. So excited.
We have so many in the incubator right now. It won't be a problem.
I look forward to it, man.
Yeah.
Those, and hogs. I mean, gosh, I've been wanting to get hognose so bad. And now that I've got the green light, I want to be all over it. So.
Awesome. Okay. We ready to jump in with the guest?
Let's do it.
Okay, cool. So our guest tonight, as already introduced, is Chelsea Isdaner. Chelsea is co-owner of Smoldering Serpents. And Chelsea's way of keeping is a way that many of us aspire to keep. There's a bunch of, it's a naturalistic approach primarily. And we're just going to basically, instead of talking about a species per se, which is what we normally do, we're going to talk about naturalistic keeping with colubrids, what works, what doesn't work, what causes feelings of accomplishment, and then what causes feelings of, oh God, here we go. And I know that there, all that's wrapped up whenever you're keeping animals. So welcome to the show, Chelsea.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Oh, no worries. You were on when we were putting the show together. You were on my very short list of whenever we get to naturalistic keeping, Chelsea will be on. So before we dive into it too far, and I know that you've been on a couple podcasts, so you can give whichever version, the long version, short version, feel free. But how did you end up in this position where you are taking care of a bunch of snakes?
Well, so anyone who's known me as a kid knows that I was the first one to dive on a garter snake. I grew up in southern Manitoba in Canada, and I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with the garter snake dens up there. I grew up usually within a couple hours of the breeding dens. So springtime came around and it was just hundreds of garter snakes everywhere. So the first one I ever caught, I saw him come up from between my feet. I was sitting on some stairs with my sister and she screamed her head off and I dove for the snake. So after that, it never crossed my mind to keep them as pets. My parents would not have appreciated that, but once I grew up and I moved out, I still didn't consider it for a good while. I had geckos, I had all kinds of, I was getting into reptiles, but never snakes. And then I was visiting with my family a reptile shop, and I saw a ball python, and I kind of asked some basic questions, kind of dumb questions looking back now, like real kind of even earlier than beginner questions, like really dumb questions. And then I went home and I just kind of sat there thinking about it for a while. And I thought, yeah, why not? I'm a grown up. I can have a snake. So I got my first ball python and, it went pretty quickly after that. I got a Bredl's python after that. And then I started getting introduced to more arboreal snakes. I love my ball python. I still love them a lot, but, the Bredl's python kind of introduced me to a different kind of snake. Mm-hmm. I remember holding him as a tiny little baby, and the way he wrapped my hand and kind of reached out to me, I was so confident climbing around. And so after that, I jumped straight to colubrids, and I got a Japanese rat snake. And
good choice.
Well, yeah, it went from there.
Very, very cool. So you've mentioned, Bredl's python, ball python, Japanese rat snake. So fast forward to today and just talk a little bit about like what you have, what you breed, what's growing up. Just kind of give the listeners an idea of the collection. Because I think that this is critical for when we then start talking about the keeping, because the fact that the vast majority of these, if not all of them, are being kept naturalistically is very impressive.
Yes. So, so the vast majority of what I keep are colubrids. I actually haven't bred anything except colubrids. So all my pythons, my boas, have just strictly been pets. So those include things like I have a ball python now. When I moved from Canada to the States, there was just a lot of logistical, legal stuff. So I could only bring my Japanese rat with me when I moved. But I still went out and I found another ball python just because I do love them. There's just something about them. I just like having one around, so I have that. I have a common boa. I've kept rosy boas, Demeral's boas. As far as pythons, it's just been ball pythons and Brettles pythons. So the rest of everything is colubrids. A lot of rat snakes. We have a lot of North American rat snakes, a good number of Asian rat snakes, blue beauties, Taiwan beauties, Japanese rats, Russian rats. North American stuff I've kind of been moving more towards. I just kind of got sucked into the black rats especially, and then I kind of got into some locality North American rats, and they've just kind of been pulling me ever since. So we got some king snakes, some milk snakes, but that's one of the things that we kind of transitioned out of a couple years ago. I really love them, but they really seem to do well in my naturalistic setups, but I just find the rat snakes more rewarding yet to keep. I like their personalities. I like the fact that they're climbing around a good bit more. They don't try to eat me as much as the Lampropeltis do. So it's really just a mix of as many colubrids and colubrid types I can get my hands on, the falsies. Usually when I'm trying to give a list of the snakes I keep, I kind of have to mentally go around all my rooms because it's such a couple of these, a couple of those.
How many rooms are there?
So there are 3 dedicated reptile rooms. There's 2 that are the pictures that you're probably thinking of with the cages in, because they're completely all available walls are covered with cages. Even the closets, actually, I've built into the closets in one of them. So there's 2 full rooms with the naturalistic enclosures. There's one room that I call the baby room that has all the hatchlings, the grow-outs, and the assorted invertebrates and lizards. And then I also have stacks of cages just kind of throughout the house. I have a stack in the living room. I have a stack, in the dining room. So it's kind of just throughout the whole house.
There you go.
Yeah.
Chelsea, when you mentioned that you got into black rat snakes, obviously I'm aware.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wonder if you got those.
Yeah.
So I'll tell you, kind of a funny story about that was prior to Chelsea had already purchased multiple black rat snakes from me before I ever saw pictures of the setups, or if I had, I didn't put 2 and 2 together, the name and whatnot. So I remember the first time I saw, and it was under Smoldering Serpents, and I the name Chelsea I would have recognized, but Smoldering Serpents I didn't at that moment. And I want to say it was probably a calico is what I think you had posted. And my first thought was, that's a beautiful calico. It kind of looks like my calicos. I wonder if it, and then I was like, man, look at that setup. That is gorgeous. Wow. And then I saw your name, under, and I'm like, oh, wow, that's my snake. Awesome. It's so pretty. It's so awesome. And I just absolutely fell in love with the caging and with the naturalistic setups that you do. And now, I see it regularly on my feed and just absolutely love it. But yeah, that first time it was so funny. Just the layers that it was like, oh, that kind of looks like oh, wait, hey, oh my God, that is. Oh, that's beautiful. It's just boom, 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 boom. It just kept going and going and going. So
nice.
Really, really neat. Really neat. Chelsea, so you're primarily colubrids now. You keep a few other things. What made you go in that direction? Really where you expanded so heavy into the colubrid side?
Yeah, so really all the boas and pythons that I've kept, they all have a lot of similarities across them. Like there's obviously a lot of differences between a common boa and a rosy boa, but at the end of the day, they all have certain similarities that I really appreciate. But I also, they're all kind of slower moving. They all tend to be towards nocturnal. And I am not nocturnal. I go to sleep early and I wake up a little bit later. So, I was just not seeing them out and about as much as I would like. What I love about them is that when I would be up late at night, if I'd go into a room, after the lights had been out for an hour or two, they'd be out. And they were the only ones really out. All the colubrids had gone to bed. Mm-hmm. But the boas and the pythons would then be out draped across their branches. And it was really cool to see, but it's also just not when I'm around them much. So it's the fact that the colubrids are up and about during the day, quicker moving. And, this is one thing that I've seen a lot of people talking about how smart snakes are or not, a certain species or whatever. And I actually think that a lot of the boas and pythons I've kept are really smart in their own ways. My Demeral's boa, actually, she used to do her little luring with her tail. And it would just amaze me. Yeah, because when I'd catch the behavior, and first of all, I think, really, you're trying to lure me in. But after I laugh at her for a bit, I would just kind of think, I don't see that behavior from my colubrids, really. It's just cool seeing the different behaviors. But at the end of the day, the colubrids, they're just more active. They're more visual. I just see them using the cages a little bit more. And I like handling them a little bit more, with my almost 7-foot common boa. She's really impressive and really fun to take out. But I enjoy interacting with, a little 4 or 5 foot rat snake a lot more personally.
Right.
Yeah. And I like the variation of colubrids. I like you can just have things that are so different from each other. Yeah.
No, I get it completely. It's so, in short, the boas and pythons are boring. This is a safe place, Chelsea. You can say that on this
very
podcast.
Safe space.
Yes.
I don't really have a problem even saying that, honestly. I'm sure some people will take offense to it, but I choose to keep them. I still choose to keep some, but yeah, in the grand scheme of things, as far as interacting with them and watching how they use the enclosure, they are a lot more boring than a lot of colubrids. Yeah.
I don't think it's even remotely possible to call a false water cobra in a large cage boring.
Absolutely not.
There's no way that phrase has never been said unless it's sick or in shed, because they will be moving and using every bit of it. And then once they get to know you, and I know you've experienced with the ones that I've given you, they definitely I don't PhD here. I don't care if the scientists of the world get pissy. They know their keeper. And they interact with their keeper, and they know who brings the rats. And the reason why I like the fall season, it gets into what you're talking about with the colubrids, is I'm actually looking at mine. Like the parents to the ones I gave you are directly across this room we're recording this in, and they will come out of their hide boxes and give me side eye when I'm typing. Like, come on, let's go. I'm hungry, and then they'll come back in, and they just keep doing that, like about once every 10 minutes, and it's. I know that those animals have no fear of me. They definitely have made an association that I am the food monkey and I am the thing that brings the rats. And I've never, ever had that with any of the boas, pythons, yellow anacondas, all the boids that I've kept. But I also think it's just they have different evolutionary histories. Like colubrids are active pursuit predators, and the boas and pythons rely a little bit more on the ambushing. And it doesn't work if you're big and lumbering and you're trying to chase down your prey. It's not going to work. Falsey can do it because they have speed on their side. So
exactly.
And
this is part of why I like keeping the way that I do, because I get to see and figure out some of those differences. Like for example, my Demeral's boa, she is about as much of an ambush predator as I've ever kept. She just sits waiting. She likes to half bury herself in the mulch under the leaves. And let me tell you, she can disappear. Like, I don't know how a snake that big disappears, but she just disappears until you see a shiny eyeball looking at you. But at the same time, what I would start doing is I'd start trying to just lay the prey down on the opposite side of the cage and seeing if she could find it. Because, the Bredl's pythons are actually terrible at this. I would go lay their food down and it would take them 2 hours to find it. My common boa is actually the worst. Sometimes she never finds it. And I think, oh no, why did she refuse food? And then I pick it up with tongs and bam, it's done. So she's like, oh, there it is. But the Demeral's boa is actually really great at hunting down just by, just that's sitting there waiting for her, no movement. And it would take her just a couple seconds to realize there's something in her cage, and she would just be zeroing in right on that food. And so seeing these differences between them is just really cool, because you're right, the falsies, my God, sometimes there's a little part in my brain that knows it's a really bad idea, but I just like to put one of them on the floor and wiggle food on the other side of the room and see what happens.
It's exciting. I've done it.
Oh, God.
I've put them in one end of the classroom, and I've how you skip a rock? I, of course, do this by myself. I've skipped a rat across the classroom floor, and they're just boom. It hop, and the one will grab it before it hits the ground on the third. I mean, it is insane. Yeah. So well, this is what's so cool is just seeing the differences even in colubrids.
I have a lot of colubrids. They'll all take off tongs, but I've never had a colubrid when I go to open the door of the female you gave me, Tempest. She's a big girl now. Mm-hmm. And sometimes she's just like, no, I'm not really going to let you open the door without trying to come out at you. So I crack the door and I go to give her the food and I'll throw, a chicken at her and she catches it before it hits the ground.
Yep.
Even if it's across the cage, it doesn't touch the ground. So it's just amazing to see these things.
Yeah, and then that's what you get when you have them in these kind of enclosures, and you can actually the enclosures are promoting species appropriate behavior, which is pretty cool.
Exactly. Yeah.
So then, kind of a good segue to naturalistic keeping is obviously when you were getting into snakes, I'm assuming that you kind of saw the gamut of keeping. There's the we call it sterile here at the university, which is the classic envisionment of that is a rack, but it can actually be done in a viv as well. So there's that. And then there's all the way up to small rainforest in my house.
Yes.
So what made you lean more towards small rainforest versus the sterile approach?
Well, so my very first ball python, I was lucky enough. I think a lot of people pat themselves on the back for going straight to a certain style of keeping, but I'm just going to say that a lot of snake communities will start you off in a very minimal, sterile setup. That's just how you'll be told to take care of the animal. So I was lucky enough, in my opinion, to find myself on a certain online community that promotes more complex keeping. So I had people who have done this for a long time holding my hand and showing me what products to buy, how to do it, what to look out for. Was stressed with her because of the ball python, especially a little baby. I had a lot of people telling me it was a bad idea, including the breeder I got her from. So it worked out great for her. I put her straight into a 4x2 animal plastics cage. I decked that thing out and she did great in it. So my first 3 snakes, I went straight into larger enclosures, and I made them all from scratch. I've always loved building stuff myself. So after that animal plastics cage, I just made the next ones from scratch. And when I met my business partner, Andrew, he already had quite a number of snakes, mostly king snakes, milk snakes, and he was using racks. So that was my first experience actually even seeing racks. And he was already wanting to move in a different direction. And I think having me around with my construction experience and my love of these creative projects, making the cages, making them not only look nice, but more importantly, functional for the snakes. So we kind of turned Smoldering Serpents in the direction that we both wanted it to go. But it was quite a process. It was during that process that we were, whittling down our Lamprepeltis into the species that we really love, like the black milks and the Honduran milks. So it's kind of been a balancing act from there because we do use racks. And I have many, many reasons for using racks. A lot of people don't want to hear it. They hear racks and they get upset.
Yes.
But there are actually many reasons that we choose to use racks for hatchlings, for quarantines, for some grow outs when we're waiting for larger cages to become available. So yeah, we maintain that balance now. The baby room has the hatchling racks, and then, they either sell and they move out to their new homes, or they get upgraded into the bigger cages that you see.
And I have another question. So you mentioned that you're building these cages?
Yes. Yeah. All of the cages right now, actually all the cages right now are ones that we've built from scratch.
So I know there's got to be listeners that are interested in that element. Are your cages primarily made of like plywood and 2x4 kind of a construction, or is it PVC, or how do you go about? Just talk that process out if you don't mind, because I'm actually curious.
Yeah, so they're all made with 3/4-inch plywood. They're all wood. Yep. And I will say that the reason for that is that most of the snakes that I keep don't require super high humidity.
Okay.
So you have the exceptions to that, obviously. The common boa, the ball python are higher humidity species.
Mm-hmm.
So I waterproof all of the cages as best I can. But for the cages that I know will house the higher humidity species, I go above and beyond and I extra waterproof that because they are made of wood.
How do you do that, actually?
Well, so there's been a couple different ways. I like to combine a really good sealant on the wood with an actual physical barrier.
Okay.
So I seal up the insides, and I've used a couple different products. Drylock is fantastic because I like the texture it's giving me, as well as it's inexpensive and it works really, really well. But I use a variety of products. And then for the cages that I know are going to house something like a ball python, where I know that ideally the substrate's going to have a deeper, wetter layer most of the time, if not all the time. I then use either, like poly sheeting.
Mm-hmm.
In the past, I've also used, for the species, again, like a ball python, where it's both high humidity and higher temperatures. My house is usually on the cool side. So then I'm actually using 1/2-inch foam sheets, solid foam sheets on the bottom. So that's both waterproofing and insulating the cage as well.
Oh, that's crazy. All right. Yeah. So then how do you get the plywood cut to spec at, I'm assuming you go to like Home Depot, Lowe's, big box store, or am I incorrect there?
I actually got myself the tools that I need.
Nice.
I grew up with a dad who could build anything and did all the time. So I went and I got my own tools. All I have, really all that I use on a regular basis is the table saw, and I'll use like a router to cut out shelves, because again, all the shelves that you see in my cages, they can disappear a little bit into the plants and whatnot, but they are actually all the same 3/4-inch plywood. I try to go as minimal waste as possible with my materials. So when I cut out the shape of a cage, and I'm cutting out, I make the doors myself as well, which are also the same 3/4-inch plywood framing the plexiglass. So when I'm cutting all these pieces, I end up with some funny cut-offs sometimes, and I just turn them into shelves.
That's interesting.
So I actually got a giant truckload of plywood delivered all at once. It took up most of my garage.
And so it just sits there, and then when Chelsea's like, we need a stack in the kitchen, you can just hit the plywood and boom, it's there. So how long does it normally take? Like you get the idea in your head, and obviously the benefit of doing this yourself is that things can be built to spec. Yeah. But like on an average, and I don't know if that exists, but like an average stack, how many enclosures is in that? And then how long does it take you from idea to it's built? Not necessarily painted and sealed and everything, but because I can't do anything with tools. Nothing. Like the only thing I can do is remove fingers and hurt other people. So I don't build anything. That's why we have like Zeus High students. They do all the building, and then I basically supervise. That's how that works. But yeah, I'm just curious about that because this is fascinating to me because I can't do it. So
Yeah, so building the box itself for the cage is extremely fast. It's been worked down to a near science because all the stacks are either 3 or 4 cages tall because I have
okay,
8-foot ceilings. So, 2-foot high cages works for most of what I keep. So that's a really nice number because it also means very minimal waste from, 4x8 sheet of plywood. So that's ideal, but obviously I want the extra height in a couple stacks. And my downstairs has taller ceilings yet, 9-foot ceilings. So then 3-foot tall cages suddenly work out really nice in a 3-cage stack. So building the box is really, really fast. Usually when these things happen, the idea gets in my head. I think about it for 5 minutes, and then I'm ready to start drawing and cutting the cage.
really,
So yeah, so the longer part is obviously I put the box together and then I need to properly waterproof it, which is just a matter of letting things dry properly in between coats. And then after that, I am installing cutting shelves, and then sealing those shelves because everywhere, snakes, if they can find a corner to make a mess in, they'll figure out a way to do it. So I just try to cover everything. I go overboard with the waterproofing and all that jazz. So yeah, and I do the shelves, and then I use spray foam because I like to put a lip on my shelves so I can put substrate on the shelf itself. And after that, then I'm now carving the foam and dry locking the foam for texture and painting it, and dry brushing it with more paint to make it look rocky. All these little things add up. But yeah, just getting the box of the cage is super fast, and then all the details are what's going to take me couple weeks.
okay. And then when you put in the floor and the ceiling of the middle cage, I guess it would be, which is, and the floor of the middle cage would be the ceiling of the bottom cage. Are those routered in, or are they screwed in, or like it kind of slides in, or no? That's not necessary.
So I personally tend to do things as simple as what works well. And I always say there's probably a better way to do most things that I do. But I just tend to think if I can wrap my brain around it and I know how to do it and it's going to work well, I'll do it. So each of those boxes is actually completely separate.
Oh.
So in between in between 2 cages, 2 layers of plywood.
Gotcha.
And I pop a couple screws in to, fasten them together, and there's absolutely no moving that. And it adds extra weight, but at the same time, I know down the road it lets me take them apart completely.
No, that's totally
while still having an enclosed cage. Yeah.
Okay. All right, Clint, do you have any questions at this point?
Well, I had to step away, as you guys know, so I kind of missed a lot of that. I apologize. So we've got the general build of the cage now, right?
Yes.
Okay, everything's sealed up, and I'm assuming that. Do you, and forgive me if I missed this question, do you build the cages knowing what species you're about to put in them, or do you build this is the size and then kind of the species goes where it fits afterwards?
Well, there's definitely some of that because I know, when we're talking about building cages that will hopefully last a long time, there is always the possibility of some snakes moving out, some new snakes moving in, rearranging. And there's also the fact that the reason I do keep like this is to observe the snakes doing as much as possible. So I get to know them within these cages, but I can only figure these things out once they're already in there. So there's definitely been some snakes where I've put them in a cage. I thought I set it up the way that they would, get the most out of it. And then I just learned that they just don't behave quite the way that I think they will. So then I'll move them to a different one that's set up a little bit differently. So because most of the snakes that I keep are average, kind of mid-sized rat snakes, as most of them, I can follow a general template for most of them, and it's going to work well. Like, for instance, I always pick a side of the cage, and I make a big, big shelf, and I set that shelf about 16 inches below the ceiling, and that's the basking shelf. Because I know that's going to accommodate the light fixtures that I use. I use halogen bulbs for heating in these cages, so I know it's going to give enough distance for the light bulb and the cage around the bulb. And then I'll fill up the rest of the space with, as much variation in the shells as possible so they can look nice and different, and it doesn't just look like a carbon copy with each cage. And that also gives me the option where if one snake just kind of grows a bit bigger than I thought he was gonna, and he needs bigger shelves to accommodate bigger hides, I can also have those options to do a little bit of musical chairs down the road.
Very cool.
Gotcha. Now, you're using live plants in this, right?
No, I'm actually not.
Okay, gotcha. I was wondering about that because I'm like, any of the setups we have with live plants in it, I mean, snakes typically destroy. The bigger the snake, the more havoc it wreaks.
Yeah, so that's actually a funny thing. I actually got a lot of people assuming that I do bioactive, and I have 0 bioactive enclosures.
Yeah, and that's a good point. Keep going with that, but I'm going to follow up on that.
Yeah, so I actually love all the components of bioactive. I am a plant fanatic. I am an invertebrate fanatic. I keep isopods, I keep roaches, I keep tarantulas, I keep lots of insects. I have a lot of plants, but the thought of putting them all together in an enclosure, never mind the number of enclosures I have, and trying to balance the needs of every living thing in there is, it's a bit daunting. I know I could do it, but it's also just, the payoff isn't quite there for me in my mind personally. I do use soil substrate, and I have leaf litter in all my enclosures. I do see the snakes. Most of them seem to do really well with that extra, litter on top, getting a more natural substrate for them to dig around in. Now, sometimes I accidentally go a little bit bioactive because I am fortunate to live in an area where there's a lot of really nice forest, untouched forest. And so I'll go out and I'll get some leaf litter. I usually just let it sit in a bag in my garage for a while, and I assume everything's out, but sometimes that doesn't work, and I find some earwigs in my enclosures. But yeah, nothing is purposely bioactive, and all the plants are silk.
Yeah, so I think John Courtney Smith's the guy for Arcadia that wrote all the books, and he actually wrote the Bioactive book. And I was listening to a podcast on the Animals at Home Network. I think Dylan had him on his show. And I was kind of shocked to hear the kind of, not necessarily the father of bioactivity, but like the guy who did the big push about a decade ago that's led us to where we are today. Even he has said there's just scenarios where this isn't probably the best approach. And I think that in a lot of ways, bioactivity has almost been weaponized. Like, you aren't doing it right unless it's bioactive. I've had lots of people approach me for false water cobras, and they'll say like, I'm going to put him in an 8-foot bioactive setup when he's older. And I'm just sitting there thinking like, do you have 40 pounds of isopods? Because these things, when they go to the bathroom, it's like equivalent to a German Shepherd. Like, there's nothing that is going to reduce that down. And then you're left with just hair everywhere if you actually do reach the bioactivity piece, because I don't care like what animal you have, hair is made of keratin, and there aren't that many things that eat hair. So the naturalistic approach, that's what I do. I also love that you said accidental bioactivity. That's awesome. I totally have done that too. I had my Blue Beauty rat snakes when they were in they were not giants yet. They were at like the 5-foot mark. I had them in a 4x2x2, and I would just run out, grab leaf litter, and just chuck it straight into the tank, the Viv. And I noticed that I checked it all the time, and there was no poop. And then one day I saw the snake go into the bathroom, and I thought, okay, I'm just going to come back and see what's going on. And the springtails from good old West by God in my backyard had just exploded, and they took that pile of poo down to nothing. And that was unintentional. Like, I didn't seed the enclosure or do anything like that. But no, for the record, naturalistic keeping, bioactivity, not necessarily the same thing. And it's okay to do both. You heard it here. I just wanted...
Yeah.
You kind of led right into one of my tangents, so...
Well,
Thanks.
that is one of the things that's really dividing the community these days. Is you have so much polarization and so many people that will not accept that there are many ways to successfully and correctly keep these animals. And I've actually gotten some negative responses when they assume I have bioactive, and I say, no, actually, that's just naturalistic. And I actually get negative responses. And I don't usually have the patience to respond beyond that. I just don't feel like I should have to explain to grown adults that there are multiple ways of doing things. Especially when it comes to keeping animals in boxes. Obviously, they are all in boxes, and we're doing our best to take care of them. But yeah, at the end of the day, and the little springtails that you mentioned, those actually pop up pretty frequently in the dirt. And you know what? I try to keep a little patch of soil in most of the enclosures damp, especially around the water dish, because I actually know that there probably are springtails in there. I don't purposely keep them alive, but I give them some moisture and see, well, if if they survive, they survive. And they absolutely do break down waste. I see them cleaning up little bits when I go and I spot clean, because even if I did do bioactive enclosures, I especially for larger snakes, you have to spot clean. You still have to absolutely spot clean, right? So, but I see the little inverts going and helping a little bit. You spot clean, you leave a little bit smeared on a leaf or whatever, and they go and they get that for you. So it's nice if they're there. I just don't, personally, I don't see the benefits of actually balancing an entire bioactive system.
No. What I do is, we're in my field season now, and I do this more for convenience. It's not in any way, shape, or form meant to be a flex, but I have to have something that can deal with those landmines that the falsies are creating. And a false water cobra keeper that if I had a mentor with that species, it would have been this guy. It's Kyle Wilson, and anybody who does falsies knows Kyle. But I asked Kyle, like, how do you deal with the smell? Like, when all of them go at once, I have a wife at home and she's not happy. Like, what do you do? And he had mentioned that he just buys like 1,000 superworms and just chucks about 20 to 30 superworms in there. And I started doing that. And that is, it's not to create the bioactive substrate. That's so when I'm away and there's poo in there, it's at least something's getting rid of it and getting rid of that bacterial load to get rid of the smell. So it's a very functional relationship. And I've now gone to the point where I do keep a lot of Getula Kings, which also are notorious for their crap. And they're like 4 feet. My garage where I have all my big snakes is like, there's a wall of big enclosures for the false water cobras, and then the very large racks that hold most of the king snakes. And when they all go to the bathroom and you open the door, if it's choreographed, it's bad. I added the superworms, and sure enough, it definitely took the edge off. And now I have like these thriving superworm colonies. So that's just a little trick for big colubrids. But I still am in there, and my son is in there with me pulling the feces out because you just have to do it. That's all there's to it. Plus, if you actually leave this is a fun fact along this line, then we'll move on to another topic. With the superworms, the false water cobras, when they are gravid, they're now that rodents have gotten expensive, they are very expensive to keep. So everybody needs to know that, because they're eating 4 medium rats a week for like a 4-week period of time. Now, that's the only time I do that. So that is not like what I do. So don't think I am doing this, but you're feeding the follicles, that whole idea. And they're just going to the bathroom constantly. And I had the superworms in there, and I missed a pile of poo in an enclosure. It was they somehow managed to tuck it just perfectly under the hide box, that when I would move it, that was always in a shadow or something. And I was doing a deep clean about a month ago, and I picked it up, and it looked like something from like a Conan movie. There were rat jaw bones in there, and ribs and vertebrae. I was like, and there's like this sea of superworms just going ballistic on it. So, they definitely get the job done. But even then, you gotta get that stuff out of there. All right. So moving back to this, I want to talk a little bit about your lights because
Yes.
is that the primary mechanism of heat, or do you have other means of heat?
No, actually, for the enclosures that I built,
yes,
the halogen bulbs are the only source of heat.
So do you know? Can you talk a little? Like, I did a deep dive on halogen bulbs about 2 months ago because in the States they got rid of all the light bulbs at Home Depot and such, and I forget. I know that there's now this thing called an Edison mount, which is the screw mount, and you can take the little halogen bulbs that have the two little prongs and put it into an Edison mount. Are you doing something like that or no?
I actually am still using halogens.
Okay.
So again, this is another reason why I primarily keep a certain type of colubrid. But colubrids in general, they just don't need as much heat.
Yes, that is
so
correct.
So actually, I should correct myself. The bulbs are not the only heat source, but they are the only heat source except for the boas and pythons.
Gotcha.
The boas and pythons also have radiant heat panels for that ambient. The house is just not warm enough for a bulb to properly heat the entire large cage. Even with it insulated like crazy, my house is usually in the low to mid 70s, and these guys just needed a bit warmer. But for all the other colubrids, I honestly usually use either a 15 or 25 watt bulb, so extremely low.
Okay.
And I can still find those, actually. The very low wattage bulbs, I can still find those. So that's all they have, and I usually aim for the vast majority of my snakes. They're usually getting a warm spot in the mid 80s, low mid 80s, and then their cool side is usually staying in the mid 70s, and then obviously the lights go off at night.
Yeah. So
that's their opportunity to cool down completely. Because obviously with all these bulbs going, the rooms do heat up during the day. Even with the AC trying to keep it steady, it obviously is still warming up. So they have that day-night temperature cycle as well.
Very cool. So another question I have. Do you see, because I see this with my animals that are in the vivs with the light. I had the heat panels for the colubrids, and I realized that was like such horrific overkill.
Yes.
That I just pulled them all out, and I've got a stack of heat panels if I ever decide to go to the dark side and back to pythons. I'm ready. But I went to just using lights and UVA to get the the deep muscle radiation, and I have noticed it doesn't matter what species it is, it creates a dial activity pattern where there's wake up in the morning, there's some form of thermoregulation. It can be like legit basking. It can be I go under the light, then I leave the light, then I go back under the light. Like my Cribos do that. They don't really bask ever. The Eastern Indigos as well, but they're in and out of that light for like the first 2 or 3 hours, and then it's zoomies the rest of the day around the enclosure. But then I have like Oregon red-spotted garter snakes, which I somehow was able to convince my wife that they needed to be next to the television, which is now fantastic because we can watch the garter snakes all damn day. And they just bask in a giant ball on top of each other directly under the halogen, get warm, go until they're cold again, and go back and bask. So am I crazy, or are you seeing the same kind of thing?
I definitely do. Some are much more obvious about those patterns than others. I would say my most consistent snake or species that basks is actually my Russian rat snakes.
Really? That's cool.
They are just little heat hogs, especially in the spring, but really, really consistently throughout the year. And they're ones that I was always told, don't go too warm, don't go too warm. And I'm never, especially now at this point in my snake keeping experience, I'm not one of those people who hears a large portion of the community saying, well, don't do this, and I'm not one of those people who has to immediately challenge it. I believe that people are saying these things for a reason. So it's not like I just went out and gave them a 110-degree basking spot, but I did try gradually increasing their bulb strength and seeing because Because the snakes that I keep that really don't like heat, their behavior changes very abruptly when they get too hot. The black milk snakes, the second they have too much heat, they're upset. They're pacing, they're rubbing, they're just very antsy. So the Russian rat snakes, I was kind of, doing my little experiments to see, because they always seem to go right to the bulb when it would come on in the morning. And so I thought, well, I hope I'm giving them enough heat. And in the springtime especially, I found that those Russian rat snakes were wanting like 90, low 90 warm spots. Yeah. And they would just sit there and bake themselves in the morning, and then they'd go cool off. But they were really seeking that heat out, especially my females when they're gravid. They're the most consistent with going and sitting right under, as close to the bulb as they can get, and just basking where they're, growing those eggs. So yeah, there's definitely some species that are much more obvious with their daily routines as the lights come on. The Bredl's pythons were great at that as well. They would just go and sit right under the heat when it would come up for the morning, and then kind of go about their day. But some don't seem to care at all, and I just really can never predict where they're going to be. But yeah, some it's pretty cool to see. They wake up in the morning and they just have their little wake up routine.
What do your falsies do? I'm just curious.
So the female tempest, she used to bask a lot when she was younger. And I found as she's gotten older, she does it less, but I still see her up there, especially when she's in shed. She seeks out that heat like crazy. And she doesn't really hide even when she's in shed. Yeah. Like she'll have these little moments where she'll go into, she has a big humid hide, and she'll go in there, which she's really never in besides being in shed, but she'll go in there for a bit, but then she'll be out again, and full zombie snake just sitting right underneath the bulb, taking all that in. And the male Tornos, he's much more shy than Tempest, but I still see him sitting under that bulb in the morning, not consistently enough that I feel he has a routine, but he definitely goes and sits under that bulb sometimes and kind of charges up, because once he's been underneath that bulb, he's like supercharged. Mm-hmm. But yeah, they're interesting ones. They don't seem to get into a routine as much as my other snakes who do bask.
That's kind of what I see. But the gravid females, like you were talking about, that's one of the tells before they become gigantic that I'm like, okay, it took, is that they do a perfect coil and they're directly underneath their heat lamps. And that's the only time I see that behavior. So yeah. All right, cool.
So talking about gravid females, sitting under there, I think that kind of moves us over to the breeding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So what does that look like in natural vivs? I mean, the cooling, the cycling, the pairing, the egg laying, the
everything. Okay, so I have 2 wine coolers at this point, because I cannot cool most of the snakes that I breed. I can't cool them in their vivs. I just would not be able to get them cold enough. So I have 2 wine coolers. I have one that takes it down to low mid 50s, and then I have another that goes down towards mid 40s for the Russian rats that really need to get really cold for a winter cycle. So anything that needs to be cooled is pulled out from their enclosures and put in their brumation tubs for the winter. I also have a lot of stuff that doesn't need to be cooled, but just needs more of a light cycle. The black milks really don't need to be cooled, but they do breed much more consistently, and I have really good results just giving them kind of a food reduction and light reduction for winter. So I could do them in their enclosures. I'll just turn off their lights so that they're sitting kind of room temperature, and I drastically cut back their food until the spring. But most of them are pulled out for the winter, and then when I get them back in and they're eating, I have had some pairs where I'm just not sure how they're going to react to each other, where I will take them out and put them in a breeding tub just temporarily to just watch them interact with each other for the very first time. And once I get the feeling that they're okay with each other, I usually just let them go nuts in the female's enclosure usually.
Gotcha.
So this is a question I like to ask people. Do you keep them together until you see X number of locks? Or is it more, I'm just leaving the boy with the girl permanently until she is obviously gravid and then he gets the exit? Which school
It very
of
much
thought are you on?
depends. It very much depends on the pair. For example, my black milks are so peaceful with each other, and they seem to seek each other out. Obviously there's going to be people taking issue no matter how I say this, but it seems like they're enjoying each other's company. They really seek each other out despite being in huge enclosures and having so many options. It's not just the male sitting on top of the female. They go back and forth. They interact with each other in a really interesting way. So for them, as long as they're both, maintaining the peace like that, which they do even when it's time to breed, I usually keep them together most of the spring until I know that she's for sure gravid. With other snakes, like my bull snakes, he likes to chew on her face and just be a general bother to her. So for them, I put them in, I watch them. If there's no action, he's coming right back out. Because when there's action, there's immediate action. So I know that if I don't see a lock immediately, or at least an attempt, that it's just not going to happen that time. A lot of the rat snakes I just find are really peaceful with each other. So I'll just put the pairs together in the female's cage, and I'll just kind of let them coexist for, a couple days at a time, take them out, feed them, let them digest, back together.
Makes sense. Do you set up any type of nest boxes or anything like that? Or okay, so
Yeah, I try.
Yeah,
I try to have as many cages set up with permanent human hides, anyways, because with these larger enclosures, it definitely can be harder to maintain any kind of humidity consistently in the whole enclosure. And for a lot of the species I keep, they don't need it. And my house is, naturally on the drier side, so I try to give all of them a humid hide, anyways. But especially for the females that are going to lay, they all get at least one nice big nest box stuck in there.
Do you ever have them say, screw it, I'm going to lay my eggs on top of this plant?
I actually haven't. Funny enough,
that's interesting.
when we were still breeding in racks, which we did for a year or 2 or 3, when we did breed in racks, I actually had that a couple times. And now in these enclosures, I haven't actually had them drop eggs anywhere besides the humid hide that I give them. I'm sure it'll happen one day, but for now, it hasn't yet.
That's really interesting.
Very cool. So after, and forgive me if, we need to, if I'm jumping ahead, but so, we've got the eggs laid and they're laying in the hides that you already provide. Fantastic. And I do find it very interesting too, that you never have them lay anywhere weird, because I know I do. Right. So obviously you're certainly setting things better, setting them up better than I am. But you're, so once you have babies, are you putting those in rack systems? Because I know you mentioned that you do use racks on some things, or
yes. All hatchlings go into the hatchling racks. So I usually do room temperature incubation for everything I can, a little bit on the cooler side. I have found that they get, a little bit more robust babies, a little bit bigger babies. It can take a really long time. The incubation times that I've gotten in the past have made a couple very well seasoned people who have been keeping snakes longer than I've been alive just about swallow their tongue. Or they're like, okay, I would have been panicking by then. And maybe I'm a little bit naive, but I'm always just like, well, I mean, if the eggs still look good and they're not ready to come out, I guess they're not ready to come out. And so they usually come out on the bigger side, more robust side. And for most of the rat snakes that I'm breeding, they come out pretty small. So I'm using 6-quart tubs to establish them. I'm the kind of person that if I actually thought it would work better to have babies in, their little mini naturalistic setups, I would do it. Really just tempt me to make a whole wall of tiny little mini cages, and I'll do it. It's just that over the years of breeding and, raising up snakes, getting babies established is a steep learning curve sometimes, especially when you're going across a wide variety of species. And I think a lot of people who haven't bred snakes, say things like, well, why would it make sense that they do better in these tiny little racks? And, but the thing about raising snakes, especially getting babies established, is what works doesn't always make sense logically. I can tell you that there's no baby snakes out in the wild eating boiled pinkies, and yet that's my number one trick for getting babies to eat.
Yes.
So, for me, when I hatch a baby, my goal is to monitor that baby, make sure they're healthy, to get them established and eating, and then to get them out the door once they're very well established to their home. I vet my homes. I ask people questions. I want to make sure they're going to good places. So my goal is just to get them established, not as quick as possible, but in a timely manner. It's no fun to watch a baby snake refuse food for 3-4 months and just hope they're going to come around. So when I can set them up in these simple setups, I can monitor them. I can clean them very easily. I can make sure that they're focusing on their food. They're not just getting lost in a back corner of a big cage and not, having the confidence to come out and get their food. It just minimizes all these variables and lets me just zero in on getting them established, making sure they're healthy and robust, and then getting them out the door to their home, who's then going to take them to the next step of a more complex setup and a more enriching life.
Very cool.
Makes sense.
Very, very cool. Have you tried to keep the babies in a semi or a naturalistic way?
Yeah, so most of the snakes, my personal snakes that I keep, my breeding adults and my pets and whatever, most of them were started in more complex, larger setups. And for some of them it worked, and for some of them it didn't, and just ended in a kind of a frustrating cycle of trying to figure out what was wrong. I honestly think my biggest learning curve, my biggest humbling experience was when I tried yellowtail cribos. And I was not prepared. I initially wanted blacktails, and this person contacted me and just so happened to have really beautiful yellowtails. And it was a bad experience all around. The breeder basically sent me unestablished yellowtails. But really, they actually, the male passed, and the female, once I got her established, the experience had just soured them so much for me that I found her a new home once I knew she was okay. But the whole experience with me starting them in a larger enclosure, because I knew they were known to be active, intelligent, really rewarding snakes, and I just got excited about that. And so I tried to start them in not even a big viv. It was still a rack, but they were big, big tubs for the babies. And I filled it up with all, cork bark that would fit in there. I stuffed some plants in there. I tried to make it as, filled up as possible. And I just could not get these things to eat. And I was trying everything the breeder was telling me. I was doing fish, birds, frog legs, everything that they were suggesting to do. And the one thing that finally broke their refusals was me gradually stepping them down in tub size until all of a sudden I had these snakes in these little 6-quart tubs that seemed way too small. And I didn't like the way it looked, and yet they started eating. So that to me was a kind of a humbling experience of, what makes sense and what sounds right to us isn't really always what works best.
Yeah.
Like I said, if I thought it was going to work as good, even having, raising hatchlings in these nice, pretty little vivs, I would do it, because I think it would just, be really cool, but it just doesn't work as well in my experience.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, there's a lot of times where, to your point, animals putting babies in smaller enclosures seems to kick them in gear. Every now and then you'll have a species, for example, mandarin rat snakes. For me, I find that they actually do a little better in what I'd call a naturalistic setup. I mean, and it's not really, but it's still in a rack system, but where many of the babies, for their first few meals, I keep them on paper towels, and it just seems easier for them to find the meal, and it just kind of works better. But with mandarins, no go. They want substrate. I need to put some cork bark in there for them to hide under. It's that particular species just likes it. But yeah, I'm with you. I think it's weird how so many of them, when we try to get fancy, they're like, no.
Yeah.
Well,
So,
and I should clarify too, when I talk about my 6 quart racks for most of the babies, I mean there's some like the baby bull snakes that come out absolutely enormous that they go straight into my 15 quarts.
right.
But for my baby racks, I do use substrate for all of them right out of the egg. But I recognize the potential issues that do come with that. Like it is harder for them to find the food. The food can sometimes get buried. Monitoring their waste is obviously not as easy than on paper towels. So even that choice to use loose substrate with hatchlings, even that has benefits, and it also has frustrations and added challenges to it. So there are many, many choices to be made when you're trying to establish and raise babies. But I think I've zeroed in on at least something that works well for me.
Yeah. No, I've done like I've put sticks and things for them to kind of climb on, especially when I was doing Pantherophis. So when we have corns and any kind of rat snake,
Yeah.
they do seem. It seems like you see them perched up on there, and I figure if they're willfully perching up off the bottom of the substrate a little bit, then okay, we'll do this. But it's not like a jungle in there. I'm talking a little bit of mulch, paper towel, substrate, toilet paper roll, and some sticks. So there's a little bit of complexity in there, but it's not a full-blown naturalistic setup.
It's exactly it, and if there's, a lot of my babies tend to stay a little bit longer with me than some breeders. Like for instance, right now we're coming into obviously the 2023 season, and I still have baby calicos. I still have, baby white-sided that I honestly just am not posting as available because I do like hanging on to some for a little bit longer. And then there's some like the black milks or the Gulf hammock rat snakes where they just weren't ready before winter hit and it got too cold for shipping. So I get to see them grow up, and they're obviously spending longer in these hatchling racks. So when I know that that's going to happen, for the milk snakes, they're so super easy. They really just want something to burrow in. You can give them sticks to climb on, and you'll catch them draping over there sometimes. But especially the black milks, they just really want to just dig tunnels.
Yeah.
So they're super easy. But with the rat snakes, I have some 15-quart tubs that have branches hot glued across the back of the tub so that they can perch up there and get a little bit of exercise in there while they're waiting to be shipped out.
Very cool. So I want to let's move on to just what does a day in your life look like maintaining this many naturalistic enclosures with this many snakes? Do you ever, obviously it has to be rewarding or you wouldn't be doing it. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, for sure.
Yes. So there's definitely more positives than negatives, but at the same time, at my house, I think I was a 50-50 split between very large racks. I'm talking like Frieder Breeder 90 whatever tubs with the windows. That's my favorite rack tub. Yeah. And for a king snake, you can totally deck that out. I'm even trying to get lights in there, and we'll talk about that at a later point in time. Yeah. And then I also have the Vivs, and I noticed that it is definitely true. I spend more time primping up the Vivs than I do the rack tubs. And there are times when I sit there and think is there some kind of psychosomatic thing here? Do I think the Vivs need more time because they're fancy? Oh, yeah. I've thought about that a lot, but just kind of talk a little bit about what your routine looks like, if you don't mind.
Yeah,
because I think people would be interested in that.
Yeah, so, well, I wake up and pretty much the first thing I do the second I'm out of bed is I go and make my rounds, look at everybody, and a lot of them are not even awake yet, but I still go look. I go and I take a whiff, and I can tell which cages are going to need extra cleaning that day, especially if it's the falsies or the bulls, then the whole room smells. So I just do a quick little round. I would say I clean water dishes. I used to have a day that I would do, set days of the week that I would do it. Nowadays, I kind of just do it as I see it needs to be done. It just feels like less of this overwhelming chore that I know is looming and coming up, and that it's going to take half the day. So, I just check everyone's water dish. Babies like to poop in their water dishes. So for them, it's a lot more work to keep them clean, but that has nothing to do with them being in a rack. That's just, I don't know, little snakes seem to find their water dishes as toilets a lot easier. But yeah, I do spot cleaning. The funny thing is with racks versus vivs, I find that racks are like when any sizable snake goes to the bathroom in a rack, you kind of really want to clean that the second you see it. Like it's gonna sit there and be gross. And I also find that snakes in racks tend to go through their waist more. Even when it's a tub that's pretty big for the size of the snake, I just seem to find that they've tracked through it more often. And in a viv, almost all my snakes have a certain corner that they go in. And, then you have, snakes like Tempest, the female falsie, who likes to just smear across the front of the plexiglass occasionally. But for the most part, she has her corner that she goes in. I find that I'm kind of fluffing up the vivs more because there is more to fix. And, a snake will knock a branch here and knock off a plant off a shelf over there. And there's just more to kind of take care of. But yeah, I find that my cleaning is a little bit easier in the vivs just because, ideally you would be spot cleaning the second you see a mess, but, life happens. That's not always how it works. And I just find in the vivs, there's so much more airflow.
Yes.
That, if I miss a little pile here in the corner, it dries out so fast that, it's not just sitting there as a gross, wet, smelly pile, until I get to it. So, I try to clean as soon as I see it, but I feel like vivs are just a little more forgiving of how my life actually goes.
Yeah. So this is an interesting observation we made. And this is one of my former grad students who also happens to now, well, she was working here when she was getting her master's degree, but she is our animal care coordinator. Her name's Kinsey Guthrie. For her thesis, I wanted to tackle head on preference with the snake. Like the whole argument of rack versus viv, I didn't want any emotional human telling me it. I wanted to set up a system where the snakes could tell me what they preferred, and then it's your classic evidence-based husbandry approach. And we set up enclosures where we got the great big 6-foot animal plastics vivariums, and we had them build us special dividers that went right down the middle. So it ended up being, I think, a 3-foot long, 2-foot deep, and it wasn't quite 2 feet tall. I think that these things were like 18 inches tall, but 2 separate vivs. And then this divider had a big, right in the middle of it, open hole cut in it, and the snakes could literally choose which side. And on the one side, we did newspaper, hide box, water bowl, and a stick. That was the enrichment. And then on the other side, we did mulch, a vertical hide, so the hides you kind of mount on the top of the viv. We did a bunch of grapewood branches, and then a water ball. And like hides, water bowls, and sticks were standardized. So it wasn't like there's a bigger hide here, and that's why. Because when you do science, you got to control for all those things. And what was extremely interesting is we had 2 of these vivaria, and we ran 4 examples, 4 different individuals, 4 false water cobras, 4 corn snakes, and then we did 4 ball pythons just to piss everybody off. And what we found, it didn't matter what the species was. It was always a 3-to-1 split. 3 of them would sit over on the enriched side, and they would spend almost all their time in the enriched side. And there was always one, though. There was always one individual who's like, newspaper's my friend. It had the ability to go to where all the enrichment was, and it chose to stay. And it was bizarre. Like, there was one false water cobra that did that. There was one corn snake that did that. There was one ball python that did that. But what was really interesting is, and it seems like poop is an underlying theme tonight. Whatever side they lived on, the snakes would go to the other side to defecate. So there was, and when they would go to the other side, they would seek out water bowls and crap in water bowls. And we all know the second you put a clean water bowl in, that's like a running joke in herpetoculture is they're going to crap there. So, here we have this experiment, and the snakes they lived in these setups for 3 months, and poor Guthrie had to look at, we had video cameras on them, and she watched 3 months of video for 12 snakes, which was kind of crazy, and made an ethogram and the whole thing. But I started thinking about this whole crapping in water bowls and having a toilet area, basically, a latrine. And when you look into the literature with wild snakes, they do that too. There are definitely papers where it's been found. And why poop in the water bowl? If you poop in the water bowl, your scent is going to go into the creek or the pond or whatever and be washed away, so the coyote doesn't know you live there. So it makes, you see that behavior with them in the Viv. Unfortunately, when they're in the rack, some of my king snakes will absolutely crap in the same corner every single time. And they seek their water bowl out like no other. And then it's, you are correct. It is the most rancid, disgusting, that is getting cleaned that day. Moment. But it's kind of interesting how they do that. But in the Vivaria, you can miss a poo because they do dry out. Yeah. That's a very valid point.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually have had, most people who keep larger groups of snakes are very familiar with forward flies.
Yes.
And
there's some flying up my nose right now.
Yeah. So, I've experienced the booms of forward flies occasionally, and I can always trace it back to the racks. Because the racks are holding more moisture in the substrate's not drying out, whereas in the Vivs, the snakes have their humid hides, but the rest of the enclosure is very dry usually. So I can always trace these fly booms back to the racks, despite me cleaning, when I see waste in a rack, in a rack I clean, I'm just pulling this waste out as soon as I see it, and I feel like I'm keeping it clean, and yet the moisture, and I feel like the lack of airflow, I can always trace it back to the racks. So, even though I might miss waste in a Viv, the fact that it's drying out so fast and the flies are not being attracted to that in the same way, again, I just feel like the Vivs are a little bit more forgiving of real life, and the fact that we're not perfect in how we, we clean and keep on top of things. That's just something I noticed. I'm dealing with another forward fly boom right now, and again, I can trace it right back to the hatchling racks, despite them being clean. But I also just, gave them all fresh, brand new bedding that comes out of the bag a little bit wet, and all the flies are like, oh, great. Excellent.
Right.
Crazy stuff.
Yeah.
So then, is there any aspect of this type of keeping that you're trying to, you challenge yourself to improve on, or is there a part of it that keeps it real and interesting, and you're like, I haven't quite mastered this yet? Because I certainly have that with the naturalistic Vivs at my hizzle.
Yeah, well, the thing is, the second you have a larger box that you're keeping a snake in, you have much more space and many more options of what to do exactly in there. And like when what you're saying with your experiment there with, the 3 preferring the enriched side and the 1 always preferring, that's exactly it, is each individual snake has its own preferences. And like I said, what you think they should want is not always what they want. It doesn't always make sense. So, I'll have some rat snakes that really don't seem to want to leave the ground, despite, all the other individuals of that species being basically never touching the ground. I'll have one that just doesn't want to seem to climb, doesn't want to perch. So I'll then kind of, deck out the floor of that enclosure, give more hides on the floor, give more leaf litter, more plant cover, so that the snake feels, like there's much more to do, many more options where they're comfortable, where they want to be to begin with. I would say in general, the one part that takes a good bit of planning and creativity, but I do find the most fun to challenge myself with, is the ceiling. Because you see, when I look at my average 2.5, 3 foot cage, I put shelves all the way up the walls, besides the basking side, which obviously has the one single basking shelf, and then the bulb is taking up space, the whole rest of the Viv is open floor to ceiling. And I try to fill that space, but I inevitably end up with a good amount of empty space, kind of towards the front of the Viv and up towards the ceiling. And obviously you need some of that space to be able to work in there and, remove the snake and clean properly. But there's also a lot of wasted potential when you look at the volume of the cage. And so I have one Viv that I really kind of lost myself in some experiments to how to fill it. And it's actually Luthien, my adult female calico black rat, because she's so outgoing and so rewarding. You give something to her and you know she's going to check it out at the very least and probably use it. And so I tried to make my own ceiling hides, and obviously you can just go and buy, your typical Reptile Basics hide and then get the mounts to just slide it in, which is a great option. But I like to do things the hard way sometimes and figure out how to do it myself. And so I ended up buying these little white, really it was aesthetics for me. And I knew that. But my ceilings are painted white to try to reflect a little bit brighter. My backgrounds and my sides, sometimes I do 3D backgrounds, sometimes I just paint the wood. But they're all dark for the most part. But the ceilings I do white, glossy white, to give a nice reflection of the light. And so I didn't want a black plastic hide mounted on the ceiling when I put so much work into making the rest of the cage look nice. So I ended up getting these white plastic, they're just plant pot trays. They're about an inch tall, maybe a little bit more. And I ended up rigging it with little ropes so that it basically turned into a plastic hammock on the ceiling of the cage. And I realized, as it was progressing, I was just going way too far into this project for what it was going to be. But I got it up eventually, and I put the snake back in the cage, and I thought, well, that was dumb. I mean, that was way more effort than it was worth. And that snake is in that hammock all the damn time. She even goes up there when she's gravid. She'll wedge her fat belly up in there, and she'll just sit there. And she's just happy as a clam up there. I also experimented with doing some kind of vines, so to speak, with some rope, draping it in her cage again, because she's just so much fun to play with. In her cage, I would drape some different lengths of rope and stuff. And I see her going from rope to rope to rope, just kind of, just floating across the middle of that cage that was unusable, just kind of floating across the ropes there. She'll even eat hanging off of them sometimes.
Nice.
So, yeah, it's a lot of work to fill each cage that much with stuff, but that's definitely the area that if I had all the time and motivation in the world, I'd be focusing on that.
Yeah. My thing was, I was hell-bent on getting one live plant to live in a cage with snakes. I wanted one. I wanted one Viv that had a live plant. And Bear and I, Baron's Racers, they're kind of long. They have this time in their life, especially the males, because the males don't get as big as the girls, where they're kind of long and skinny, but they're also very muscular, so they're pretty damn strong. But when they're around 4 feet, they're not quite big enough to utterly demolish a plant. And I achieved it. I was so proud of it that I spent a day trying to get pictures. It's really hard to get pictures, by the way, of an entire Viv and show it off and it not look ridiculous. But they're in the book, so whenever the book inevitably comes out sometime this decade, you all can see it. But I was like, check, it's working, and it was really, really badass because it was my blue Bear and I, the only one that I made that was blue, and she was amongst all the leaves, and it was like really, really picturesque, and it was working for like 6 months, and I went away to a conference over the winter, and my heater kicked on, and it didn't shut off, and it just blew hot, dry air in there, and nuked that pothos. That was the plant, by the way. Like I
was going to ask.
My standard was very low. Yeah. Like it, and what I do with pothos is, I have them. I feel horrible for them. I have about 20 of these things that they're on a rotation. So I'll put a pothos in, and what I literally do is I buy like the $7 pothos at Lowe's. Just nothing fancy at all. And then I get the water, the clear plastic water bowls for the plants, but it's way too big for this particular plant. I think I get like the 10-inch diameter one. And pothos can, fish keepers put pothos in aquariums, so that you can super saturate the soil. And that was the thing that was killing it all the time, is that it would be fine, and then I would like not water it right, and then the snake's beating the hell out of it, and then it dies. So I just started to literally keep 2 inches of water in that water basin all the time. So the pothos always had water, and it seemed like I could reach an equilibrium with some of the snakes where there was enough growth that the snake might kill this part of the plant, but the other part of the plant's growing, and it was like this cycle. But the snake's growing, and then it inevitably reaches the tipping point where the snake is now too big, and then the plant dies. But it did ultimately, work. But that was my big challenge to myself, was I'm going to get one plant. And I did it, and that pothos is still alive. I was able to bring it back from the verge of death. But
those things, I mean, they're troopers. That's I agree. I mean, that's like the one. There's 2 plants that I've seen survive. When it comes to being in a snake's enclosure, and it's pothos and, coincidentally, snake plant.
Yes, I was going to say it's got to be snake plant.
It seems to do very well. As far as long as the snake's not too big. You get too big of a snake, and it's just going to crush it. But yeah, the pothos, I mean, they take a beating and just keep on growing.
Yeah, I just pull one out, and it looks like you look at it and you think this thing's going to be dead within the next 48 hours, and nope. It goes back in the window, and then I rotate in one of the nice, lush, pretty ones, and then 2 months later, it looks like it's going to die, and that one that was in there has recuperated, and it's just, that's the system. That's actually what I teach my students in the herpetoculture classes. You got to kind of think outside the box here and don't make the plants permanent, because you have to be, acceptance is key, and if you have an active snake, if you have some ambush species, sure, you could probably get a plant in there, but that being said, the ambush species is probably going to be heavy bodied, and the one time it wants to go on adventure time, it's going to kill everything in there. So,
right.
Anyway, very, very cool. So I guess we're on to our last question, and this is Matt's question. He gets to claim this one. He started asking it, and good luck to you, Matt, wherever you are, by the way. We've been asking people to kind of wrap the show up with where do you see herpetoculture in 5 to 10 years? I went on Project Herpetoculture and did an episode for them, and I talked about how for some people this is a hobby, for other people this is more of a discipline. Kind of talk about where it falls for you on that spectrum, and then do we have good trends in herpetoculture right now? Is it all gloom and doom? Is it rainbows and sunshine? What's your perspective going forward?
Yeah, so I've really pulled back from the social media part of the reptile keeping community. Everybody who's in it knows how it can be sometimes. And I find that that's getting a bit worse, just in my, relatively short experience in the grand scheme of things. I just seem to see. And I kind of have a hard time myself fitting in to different groups because it is so polarized, and I actually don't align with many of them entirely. And they're usually not forgiving of that.
No,
I initially started gaining traction, with people following my page and such. I initially gained traction in the more advanced side of things. And I started to find that as I gained experience as a breeder and I figured out things that worked and didn't work, and I found things, certain things just don't matter. And there's a lot of people that don't like to hear that right now, is they don't like to hear that some things just don't matter, and it's personal preference. I have snakes that are in beautiful big vivs right now that I guarantee that snake is not really getting anything out of that viv that they couldn't get out of a larger sized rack. They're just, and they're rat snakes, right? Where other individuals of the same species are active. They're utilizing the whole enclosure the way I hope and the way I enjoy seeing. But then there's individuals that I just don't think it matters what you keep them in, as long as their basic needs are being met. They're not active individuals, that they don't interact with their environment in the way you would expect. So, there's a lot of things where I've come to the realization that we may put a lot of weight on, the choices we make, but as far as the animal's well-being, it's just not something worth getting that upset about. and demanding that people, do things a certain way. And, I've had this weird little balancing act of really falling more towards the older keepers in a lot of ways. And it's not really popular for someone my age to be aligning with the older keepers. But I just find that, when things go sideways and I can't figure out what's wrong, they're the people who know how to troubleshoot things. They're the people who have been doing this all this time. They know how to do the basics before trying for something complicated. And which is why when I personally sell snakes now, if someone is going to bother asking me, as the breeder, I will encourage them to start with a small, simple setup. Like, get the snake eating, get the snake settled and comfortable, and then move on to more complex things. But get the basics first. So I find myself aligning more with these, older keepers who kind of established keeping snakes. And on the other side, I find that, I get frustrated when some of these older keepers are discouraging people from trying new things, from trying to be better and pushing ourselves. They say, well, it's worked for me for 30 years and my snakes all eat and produce babies, so there's nothing more to do, which I don't agree with that either. There's so many ways that we can improve. But, I try to take the time to talk to people like that and figure out why they feel that way, because there's so much animosity from both sides of things that it's understandable that both sides are also defensive. Automatically they're defensive and they just kind of come off stronger than they mean to, or even that they really feel. Like I had a conversation with one of these, really prominent old time keepers once, where he was kind of poking fun at, the younger kids these days, making things so complex, and all the snake needs is a box and water and food. And, I just asked, if someone has a dog, any other pet, if someone has a dog, we know they don't need a lot of things, but would you be making fun of a dog owner, if they take that extra effort to take their dogs on, more walks and get them an extra nice bed to sleep on, or, better than just bottom of the barrel food? We do better for our animals because we want them to be healthy and we want them to have good lives. So, me and this breeder had a great conversation after that. And it was just nice to bridge what felt like such a big divide in the community between people like me. Like, when you look at the pictures of my stuff on social media, it probably looks like I'm more on the advanced side even than I actually am, because I don't post pictures of my racks. I'm not hiding them. And I have so many reasons for using them, and I'm happy to talk about it with anyone. But I don't post that side because that's not the side I actually, enjoy showing off. It's just that's kind of like the, that's the work side of things, establishing the hatchlings and all that. And so it probably looks like I'm leaning more towards one side than I actually am, when in reality, I'm just having a hard time fitting into any larger group. So as far as the future of everything, for me personally, it still feels very divided and unnecessarily hostile between a lot of keepers. There's the people who appreciate and love snakes, such a small group to begin with. I just can't quite believe sometimes the amount of fighting amongst ourselves.
Right. That was one of the most articulate responses to that question ever. And I feel like you actually were in my brain talking, because that's I agree with everything you said 100%.
Absolutely.
I think keyboards make people warriors, man. Like, yes, when you are in your safe hidey hole of your home, or your, on your phone or whatever, and you're not in the immediate presence of the human you are communicating with, it makes you it just has a tendency, and I'm guilty of this, I'll fully admit to it on occasion. Your hackles get up and you're on it. I brought this up in a former episode, but I really feel like one of the things that we need to get back to is the face-to-face interaction. Yes. I don't think COVID did anybody any favors. We were all isolated. We were literally mandated to be isolated, and I don't want to get down that political line. So, but just talking about the history of it, and now we've kind of come out of it, and people are working from home now all the time. There's more of a push for electronic communication, and like this is the future, but there's got to be something said to all those herp societies out there, because I guarantee you, when a herp society gets together, that full spectrum of keeperdom is probably in that room, and everybody's just sharing a moment with the speaker, or BSing before the meeting starts, and it breaks those barriers down. But yeah, no.
Well, and that's really, that's what I find, that when you get face to face with someone, I don't let people come into my house very often. I have in the past, years ago, I have had minor mite outbreaks, and let me tell you, the learning curve when you get something contagious flying through your collection is, So I really keep things under lock and key if it's not someone I personally know and is otherwise a friend. But even just going out and having people meet me on my driveway to pick up a snake.
Yep.
Getting to see them face to face. Yeah, exactly. Getting to meet face to face is just all of the, most people I meet are nice people anyways. But, I've even come, to chat with a couple people who I know are quite aggressive online. And I don't agree with some things I do, and I don't agree with, the way they do some things. But when you're just face to face and you're talking, it's so easy to just share a laugh about the fact that snakes like to shit in their water bowls.
Yep.
At the end of the day, we love these animals, and we have different ways of doing things, and we have our reasons for doing things differently. But the internet definitely makes it much easier to focus on our differences.
Yeah, Andrew, and everybody has to have an opinion. That's what kills me too.
Yes.
It's one. Sometimes the best thing to say is just nothing.
Yes.
If you're not an expert, just shut up.
Yes.
Just it doesn't matter what you're thinking. Just stay out of the conversation.
Yes.
And we see that all the time, whether it's a debatable topic or and this is not even necessarily about people in the hobby arguing over it, but whenever you see someone post a picture of a snake and they say, "What is this?" and you've got 50 people that don't know snakes telling them what it is, and it drives you crazy. But I mean, by the same token, we see that if don't put down racks if you've never used them.
Yep.
Don't put down that vivs aren't beneficial if you've never used them.
Yep.
You don't have both sides of the argument to be able to really weigh your opinion.
Yep.
That's what just kills me about the need to speak.
Yes.
It's almost like that's what social media has given us, is this need to put our piece out there when our piece is irrelevant sometimes. And it just takes a grown up to know that.
I agree. And I also feel like, I've actually gotten sometimes where someone will ask me a specific question or my feelings on a certain topic, and I will say, I don't have strong feelings on that. Or I personally feel like it doesn't matter too much either way. And I get negative reactions to that. And it's almost like it's viewed as like a cop-out to not have a strong opinion on something at all times. I briefly started up a YouTube channel just to, throw out some videos of my snakes. And I personally just find the work of putting out the quality of videos that I want to be far too much. And so I do have some more planned to make, but it's a lot of work. But I also just found myself struggling on what's actually worth putting a video out there on. What's just me kind of, just talking for the sake of talking, which I don't like doing at all. And what's actually putting valuable information and insight out there. So, I do find that there's a lot of just talking and arguing for the sake of making noise. Yep. And it's just pushing people apart.
Yep. Loudest voice in the room is heard. And I think that most of the people fall under this umbrella that was just discussed in the past 10 minutes. Like, I really do.
Yes,
and
I do agree, yeah.
When I came back in 2016 to herpetoculture, and here I am, this, lofty professor who's going to teach herpetoculture. I have to do everything right. And I said this on one of the podcasts I was on recently, like, I was 100% anti-rack. I looked at racks and thought there's no way that's valuable. And then I became the curator of a couple hundred animals, and I bought the first rack, and I tried to get the animals out of the rack, But there's also, species appropriate behaviors, and whether people want to hear it or not, there are semi-fossorial to fossorial snakes that are nocturnal. Like there are 2,500 plus species of snake on our planet. There's absolutely going to be a handful that setup will be appropriate for. There's also species it's not appropriate for. But it wasn't until I actually started using them, like what Clint just said, and seeing the utility, and then keeping with all the different methods, with the naturalistic vivaria, with the rack systems, with standalone Rubbermaid tubs, with exoterras, the whole gamut. It's just a tool in the toolbox. And I like to grow things up in racks, and then when they get to a certain size, they move to a Viv. Like, that's my standard operating procedure here. But I just don't. But yelling and screaming and shaming people, there's no reason for that. That's just completely unambiguous. You'll probably get through to somebody about the racks far more effectively if you have a lucid conversation about what you perceive to be negative than if you just come out swinging, saying that they suck and you suck because you're using them. And I don't want this to be interpreted as like everything I have is in a rack, because it's not. Because I would never keep a false water cobra in a rack. The babies stay in a rack. When they get to, we have had situations here at the university where we had animals that were part of experiments, and they were in racks too long. Like they got to a size where it was definitely bothering me. They're in the rack, and that's when they, we move them out immediately. So with everything, there's a balance. There's a tipping point. But that was an excellent way to wrap it up.
I was gonna just try to wrap it up on a more positive note, because it's easy for the negative to kind of overtake, especially when you're looking at your phone or your computer and you're scrolling social media. It does feel overwhelming sometimes. There are days when I try to keep my social media fairly active. So there's days when I know I should make a post, and I make a post and I quickly share it into one or two groups, and I just like run away. And it's like, I don't want to see anything else that's happening in these groups. Because, you see posts in there, someone's asking a basic question. I know I can give helpful advice, and then someone will start arguing with me. So, I usually just try to stay out of groups and online communities. But I have to say, that I'm not a social person. And over time, the group that makes up most of my friend circle have come from the reptile community. Yeah. And, for all the loud noise of people arguing over the years, I have customers who bought their first snake from me years ago and still give me updates, and we've become close friends. And yeah, for all the loud noise, I feel like maybe, like you said, the face-to-face, it just makes such a big difference that, part of me feeling so negatively about the community as a whole is also just where I choose to look. Because I know if I go into certain Facebook groups, if I go into a ball python Facebook group, I know I'm going to see probably the worst that there is to offer in the reptile community. But if I go, speak to someone face to face, and I have this relationship that's, built over years, and our shared passion of snakes, it is a great hobby to meet really amazing people if you can avoid the crazy chaos that also comes with just about everything nowadays. But yeah, I feel that overall it's if we keep trying to push unity, if we keep speaking out about the divide, I hope that people will come together a little bit more. I don't know, I still take away my years from breeding snakes and keeping snakes and putting my stuff out there. I still take away for me personally, I take away a very positive experience.
Well, and you were certainly one of those amazing people. So thank you so much for coming on tonight. This was absolutely fantastic. It was a nice change of pace from our typical format. I enjoyed the conversation. So if people do want to see you online that are hearing this for the first time, and I really hope that if you were listening to this at some point in the episode, you were like, what is Smoldering Serpents? And you went on to social media and checked out all the amazing photographs that you guys have. Where can people find you and get a hold of you? And then maybe, if you want to, a gentle plug for what you might have available this season?
Yeah. So Instagram and Facebook, those are my two pages that I keep up to date and active. Like I said, my YouTube channel is, it's been inactive for probably about a year, but I will never take it down. I am just planning on leaving it there. And I am also planning on adding a couple very heavily requested videos, just asking how I do certain things. So yeah, there's the YouTube channel. I also have, for things available, I do use Morph Market. I also use Happy Dragons, a newer website, more based around just a bit of a different way of doing things. It's going in a nice direction, I think. And yeah, as far as what I'll have this year, I obviously still, like I said, have babies from last year, and I have no problem hanging on to them till the right home comes along. But lots of rat snakes, lots of Gulf hammock rat snakes. I'm a little surprised they're still around. I guess I haven't posted them too much, but they're just such cool snakes. I'm hoping they'll find some really great homes and get a little bit more popular, because I think they're a little underrated. But yeah, black milk snakes, Russian rat snakes, hopefully Japanese rat snakes, calicos, bull snakes, corn snakes, Okatee corn snakes.
Nice.
Nice little mix of stuff there. Yeah.
All right.
Very nice.
And if you want to find me, Dr. Crawdad on Instagram, Zach Loafman on Facebook. And as always, this is the forever plug. You want to go to grad school, you want to go to undergrad and work with snakes. I plug grad school all the time, but if you're in high school listening to this, 400 animals you get to take care of every week. Everything from an 8-foot water monitor down to a baby crested gecko. We have it all. Sound like a used car salesman. Anyway, but yeah, no, by all means, hit me up. I've had quite a few people hit me up. And one more time, if you have episode ideas, some listeners definitely have been they're messaging me about things. Message Clint as well. We are definitely willing to make episodes based off of what you want. Great example was Glenn Brooks talking about the Mad Cats. That was somebody asking for Mad Cats. So we're here to serve you. And with that, Clint, where can people find you?
First, I just want to say, Chelsea, it's been great to actually chat with you. We had messaged back and forth many times, over the years.
Yes.
Snakes going, one way and then the other way. So it was nice to finally get to chat with you, even though not in person. The folks listening can't see you, but I can see you, so it's been nice. All right, if you want to find me, you can check us out on metazotics.com or Metazotics on Facebook, Metazotics LLC on Instagram.
There we go. And I want to give one more shout out to the Morelia Python Radio Network. Eric is currently in Utah herping his little butt off with Nipper, I think Dustin Graham, obviously Justin Julander. So I know that there's a lot of herping going on. Yeah, we're proud members of the network. We're very happy that we found a home here, and we appreciate everything Eric does. So thanks, Bud, for having us. So with that, whether it's morning, afternoon, evening, or night, whatever time it is, hope you had a good one, and goodbye.